Talk 49.
This is Full Stop number 4. I'm Nigel E. James. A very warm welcome to you. In this edition of Full Stop, we're visiting the newly found old of Mongolia. We're saluting the Queen in a rainstorm. We're going on a train through beauty in Hungary. We're going cycling in France and having a drink. We're being moved by long overdue coming home. We're tuning into long ago radio, and we're looking at a French way of looking at children. But to begin with, my very own story of my disastrous start on the stage. Talk 49. Theatre had always been one of my dreams, and you can surely imagine how happy I was when two friends of mine phoned with an offer, a part in their upcoming play. And being offered a part by Hannis and Gordon was an honour. Their little theatre club was very well known, and in those days put on very good plays. I was very, very proud. And it turned out the play wasn't a play, but an opera, or better put, excerpts from Tosca, and I was to play the lead role. And luckily there was no singing involved, only miming. I had no words to learn. My theatre debut, I felt sure, was going to be a success. I, without any doubt at all, had been the best choice of all for the role. But when the show came to an end, the audience didn't agree. I had not been accepted. The applause had only been lukewarm. But not to worry. I wasn't alone. Even Shakespeare's first night had not been a success. Audiences, it seems, are often unable to recognize greatness. And things haven't changed. Poor me and poor William Shakespeare. But I was up at the top. I was flying, and it wouldn't be long until the phone rang again. And the next offer came, and back to the theatre I went. But something had changed. Would I mind pulling the curtain? I said no, I would do it with pleasure. Theatre, after all, was a big part of my life. A starring role I was promised was waiting for me. It was only a matter of time. But the next time wasn't much better. I was the doorman checking the tickets. And that was the end of my life on the stage. The world wasn't ready for me. I began at the top and worked my way down to the bottom, and there I still am. Theatre has always been one of my dreams, but luckily there are people who can do it much better than me. But maybe one day, who knows, there must be a part that's waiting for me. So, until then, I'll just carry on dreaming. Not in the spotlight. A true story, written and read by Nigel E. James. Talk 49. Mongolia has seen and survived many changes. Michael and Judith Brash went there and came back with the story. And now, the pendulum of time. We're saying hello to Michael and Judith Bash. Just a few months ago, I had the very great pleasure of meeting Michael and Judith Bash, and they told me of their trip to Mongolia, and there in Mongolia was very much to see and admire. There were the vast empty plains that went to horizons. There was the flora with its strength to survive the hardest of winters. There were the rivers that flowed from the mountains, and there was the uniqueness of its wonderful people as well. They fully understood the balance of nature in connection with everyday life. But this beauty had its dark sides as well. There were the post-communist ruins of industrial plants, the huge blocks of flats that should never have been, and this was the saddest of all, the many ruins of fine Buddhist temples. Communism had had no time for religion. But then came the surprise. And the surprise was in the middle of nowhere and all alone on a plain. It was a beautiful Buddhist temple that, miraculously, had not been destroyed. And because the door was open, Michael and Judith Bash went in. And there, in front of their eyes, was the pendulum of time. A grandmother, her daughter, and her granddaughter. 3 generations together. And what they were doing was not only telling, but moving as well. The grandmother was carefully wrapping sacred books in fine silk, and whilst doing so, gently patting each one and saying a prayer. But her daughter was very, very clearly nervous and wanted to leave. She was still feeling the terrible oppression of the communist era. But the granddaughter was doing exactly the same as her grandmother, gently patting each book and saying a prayer. She was living the magic of belief. It was as if the communist time had never existed. The pendulum of time had swung back again. It was spring when Michael and Judith Bash visited Mongolia, and it wasn't only the flowers that were coming out again. The Mongolian soul was blossoming too, and that was a wonderful thing. The pendulum of time. Michael and Judith Bash.
Talk 49.
Coming homes are things we all have in common, but this coming home was a one-off occasion, a very moving story. And now, the sweetest moments of all. We're saying hello to Christian Rinder. Coming homes are possibly the shortest and sweetest moments of all. Coming homes are things to look forward to, moments to dream of, and things to hope and pray for as well. And coming homes are seldom forgotten. But there are special coming homes that happen only once, and Christian Rinder never forgot his coming home from war. It was a hot summer day as Christian Rinder came up the road. It was a long road, and being back where he was something he'd never imagined. For him, and millions of others as well, still being alive was a question of chance. And Christian Rinder had had a very hard war. He had survived Holland, Belgium, and Stalingrad too. And now all that mattered was home. And when he got home, the door was wide open, and there was his mother. She was down on her knees and washing the floor. And Christian Rinder just stopped. And then his mother looked up, and she froze. This was a moment she had never expected. But before she could reach him, she fainted, and he caught her, and she fainted again. And when she came round, she was in her son's arms. This was a moment she had never dared dream of. A dream had come true without being a dream. Coming homes are beautiful moments, but the ones that come out of the blue are the nicest and sweetest of all. and when Christian's girlfriend Lucy arrived, it made the moment complete. Coming home is all about those who are waiting. Coming homes are the nicest of all. The sweetest moments of all. Christian Rinder. You're listening to Full Stop here on Talk 49. Day trips on trains are always good fun. This one was a trip of great beauty. And now we're taking a trip from Veszprém to Győr. It was a very hot day when we took the train from Veszprém to Győr. We were in Hungary, and our short journey north was full of summertime fun. Amongst the passengers were hikers, picnickers, school children on trips, families out for the day, and regular passengers too. And there was noise. There was the sound of eating and bottles being opened. There was laughing and singing, and of course the screaming of kids every time the train went into a tunnel. And the magic of the country passed us by at a very slow speed, and that was just right. This short Hungarian route is unique. It is 80 kilometers of beauty non-stop, and the 3 hours that it takes are worth every minute. And there is plenty to see. On its way north, the train passes through the Bakon, an area of outstanding natural beauty. There are forests and streams, and the fauna and flora are simply amazing. A paradise for those who love nature. And of course there are towns and villages too, and they haven't changed for many long years. And these are not only places of life as it is now, these are places of history too. There are castles, monasteries, churches, farms, schools and inns, and much more as well, and all to be seen from the train. And this is the sense of the trip, the journey itself. So next time you have time, why not take it and go down to Hungary and take the train from Veszprém to Győr and back again too. And by the way, there is plenty to see and do in both of these places as well. And that's how Hungary is, a country full of surprises. And perhaps this little train is the biggest of all. It was a very hot day when we took the train from Veszprém to Győr. We were in Hungary, and our short journey north was full of summertime fun. A hot summer journey, a trip from Veszprém to Győr. Talk 49. Cycling, smoking and wine don't go together. But long ago it was different. And now, a glass of red wine and a smoke. We're saying hello to Martin Klosar. Changes are part of everyday life. Things come and go, and others remain and change with the times. And as Martin Klosar discovered whilst watching a film, the Tour de France was, and still is, the perfect example of change. The film which Martin Klosar saw was in black and white and shot just after the Second World War. And the film not only showed the history and story of the Tour de France, but 3 interesting changes as well. And the thing that Martin Klosar noticed the most was the fact that the competitors were not wearing helmets. The race was just as dangerous then as it is now. Then came the smoking. Most of the cyclists were not only smoking during the breaks, but also whilst cycling as well. This would never happen now. But of course a good cigarette needs a good wine, and the favourite refresher was a glass of red wine. Cycling and drinking was no problem then. But the Tour de France is not the only thing that has changed. When Martin Glossar was a boy, there were no seat belts in cars, and very few motorcyclists wore crash helmets. These were things that nobody thought of. And smoking too was widely accepted. It was done on buses, trains, aeroplanes, in cinemas and homes, and everywhere else too. Now thankfully, planes, trains, offices, buses and cinemas no longer smell of cold, stale smoke. No smoking has been a very positive change. So, as Martin Glossar says, remember the now. It won't last forever. Things disappear all the time and are quickly forgotten. And Martin Glossar believes that photos are the best way of saving our past. Our present will then be kept for the future. Changes are part of everyday life. Things come and go, and others remain and change with the times. And as Martin Glossar discovered whilst watching a film, the Tour de France was, and still is, the perfect example of change. Martin Glossar made a discovery: a glass of red wine and a smoke.
Talk 49.
And now, an amusing story of how the Queen left Vienna in a storm. And now, the Queen in a storm and an up and down day. We're saying hello to Mrs. Kastner. It was more than 10 years ago, and I remember it well. I was having a coffee with Mrs. Kastner in Vienna when she told me the following story, and it was all about the Queen and a storm. It was the 60s of last century. Queen Elizabeth II was on a state visit to Austria and was having a wonderful time. But then sadly came the end of her visit, and Queen Elizabeth II was waiting for her plane to go home. But then came the storm, and it was fierce. In fact, so fierce that the Queen's special plane was unable to land. And so there was the Queen, stuck fast at the airport. But she wasn't alone. There was the Austrian President, the Prime Minister, the British Ambassador, and the Mayor of Vienna, and all having to think of something to say. Small talk with the Queen, and in English it was a stress. But fortunately there wasn't too long to wait. The Queen's plane was soon able to land, and a feeling of relief came over the meeting. Soon the Queen would be on her way home. But that wasn't the end of the story. There were the soldiers. And the soldiers were wet, cold, miserable and hungry. They had been outside the whole time in the storm, waiting to give the final salute. And then, when the Queen finally came out to go to her plane, the general in charge ordered his men to salute. But that was easier said than done. The wind was still very strong, and not all the soldiers were able to hear his command. And so it was that only the soldiers nearest the general actually saluted. And then came the ups and the downs. Seeing that the soldiers at the beginning of the line had saluted, the ones further down the line saluted as well. And then the ones at the beginning saluted again to catch up, and then the ones down the line did it again. And this went on for at least 3 or 4 minutes, an up and down show. And then, holding her hat, the Queen boarded her plane. And I wonder if Her Majesty the Queen ever thinks back to that up-and-down day in Vienna, the day her hat nearly blew off in a storm. And Mrs. Kastner, she certainly never forgot that stormy afternoon. She was watching it live on TV. Her son was one of the soldiers in that great Guard of Honor, and Mrs. Kastner was proud. There was her son saluting the Queen, not only once, but 4 or 5 times in a row. Hold on to your hat, it might blow away. You're listening to Full Stop. And now it's time for our saying of the day. And our saying of the day today comes all the way from Wales. Here are some extraordinary, very clever Welsh words. If you want to be small in a very big way. Here are these brilliant Welsh words one more time. If you want to be small in a very big way. Brilliant words from Wales. And now to finish with, here are some unusual thoughts about what French people think about little French children. And now, Suffer the Little Children, a book by Corinne Meyer. In 2009, I read an interview in the Wiener Zeitung, an Austrian paper. Corinne Meyer, the provocative French author and psychoanalyst, said that childhood was a disaster, and her then latest book, No Kids, 40 Reasons for Not Having Any, had managed to shock the entire French nation. The book was too much for the normally cool French, and feelings were high. Having children, said Corinne Meyer, was just about the worst and most stupid thing that anyone could possibly do. Children were boring and dull, and with them you were never free to do what you wanted, and school holidays were the worst. They were restricted to mindless time-killing things. Kids only loved zoos and Disney World, both as Corinne Meyer believed were as bad as the plague. And as for museums, or any other kind of culture, forget it. Then of course there was Christmas. This was the one time in the year when people could prove what good parents they actually were. All that was needed was a very good present. The rule was, and still is, if the kids are happy, then the parents are happy as well. Corinne Meyer found nothing good to say about children. She described them as leeches, killjoys, future losers, boring, and squealing gremlins, all of which naturally meant that she too had been all of these things when she was a child, and being a child was something she hated, and the reason was simple. Corinne Meyer was born in Geneva, which really makes her Swiss, not French, a fact which she blamed for her very boring childhood. She hated school, she had no real friends, and her father was an unexciting businessman, and her mother a tiresome housewife. So what sort of person is Corinne Meyer now? Surprisingly, Corinne Meyer is, despite her very own 40 good reasons for being the opposite, a mother. She has 2 children, which she had because she was scared of being alone, and life, because of them, is a battle. She has to get them up in the morning, she has to feed and clothe them, she has to make sure that their homework is done, and because they take all of her time, she can't be herself. And this is her problem. Childhood, she says, is not paradise, and children are nothing other than objects which are owned and controlled by their parents. Utopia is being grown up, because it is then that one can do what one wants. And as far as Corinne Meyer is concerned, if you really want to bring up a parasite, then you're better off with a gigolo. All very strong words. In short, Corinne Meyer is everything that she never wanted to be. Maybe she was just scared of herself. Or is the answer much simpler? Could it be that she simply hates life? A good question. But judging by the number of people who bought and read her book to the end, she must be a very good writer. Corinne Meyer, a writer who wrote about a subject she hates. But does she hate all the money it made her? Children normally cost very much money, but Corinne Meyer was clever. Her children not only made her a fortune, but shocked the French nation as well, and that's a very hard thing to do. Au revoir, Madame Meyer. Suffer the Little Children, a book by Corinne Meyer. What an interesting hole to finish in. You're listening to Full Stop here on Talk 49. I'm Nigel A. James. Thank you for listening, and please join me next time. Bye-bye for now.
Talk 49.